Peter.
Hey, welcome back.
Welcome back. I am so happy to start part 2 of our video series. Thank you again for taking some more time to chat with me about some of the questions that educators have been having about your work in building thinking classrooms. For those listening, this is the second of our series of 2 Q&A videos that will tackle questions about the Building Thinking Classrooms framework as you try to implement it. And how in this one, we'll talk about how building thinking classrooms is compatible with other instructional strategies, or sometimes incompatible with other instructional strategies that you may already be using. We will talk about grading and assessment, some of the questions that have come up. If you have other questions related to implementation or co-teaching or using substitute teachers or modifying practices around COVID protocols, please watch part 1 of this series, as we recorded that separately and tackled some of those questions there. So briefly, just before we dive in, Peter, we've talked about how your 15 years of research in math classrooms has led you to discover and summarize what happens when you really make students think about math and how to get there. And your book, Building Thinking Classrooms in Math, which published last year. I'll let you hold up your copy because my camera's not seeing it very well. There you go. Thank you. It's been out 10 months and is now the #1 bestseller of all time in its first year for Corwin Math, which we're so super proud of. And as teachers have started to explore this work and implement it for the first time, especially this year in the fall of 2021, there have been a lot of questions that I know we wanted to take some time to explore together. So again, thank you for taking the time for your audience to help them understand more of the nuance.
My pleasure.
Okay, so just diving right in now. There have been a lot of questions from teachers who are already using routines like number talks, or they're doing some bell ringers, things at the beginning of class as a warm-up. They want to know, do I just dive right in? Can I take attendance? How does this work? So how do you see this as fitting in with some of those sort of smaller warm-up instructional routines that teachers are already implementing?
Right. Okay. So, first of all, our research sort of showed that we needed to sort of demarcate non-curricular versus curricular tasks, and that it was non-curricular tasks were really, really useful for kickstarting a culture of thinking in the classroom, to get them going. And that the research showed that we needed 4 or 5 experiences with non-curricular tasks to get that machinery running. And then to transition to curricular. And that served 2 purposes. One, it helped the students get to be different in a non-pressure situation. But more importantly, it helped the teacher to try something new without the pressure of feeling like they had to achieve some learning outcome that day.
Right.
And indeed, the way the book is written, every time we introduce a new practice, there's new non-curricular tasks. And for teachers' sake, it's just when you're going to try to implement something new, do it underneath a non-curricular task, because it just takes that pressure off of you. And the students love it. They love that sort of space. Having said that, there are some teachers who have also found a lot of value in having sort of, and I'm going to say non-curricular in a sort of loose term here, but having a non-curricular task at the beginning of the lesson before transitioning into the more curricular stuff. And that's not to say that which one doesn't belong, or number talks, or grasp without words, or estimate 180, or any of these other instructional routines are non-curricular. It's not that at all. It's about just creating, having a space that has less goals around it, let's say, at the beginning of the lesson. And if that's what you're doing, keep doing it. But I'm going to give you some thoughts around that. So one of the things our research really clearly showed was that we need to get the students thinking within the first 5 minutes of what you declare to be the beginning of the lesson. And the reason for that is that when we put them in that passive role of receivers of knowledge, it's really hard to then transition them into active role of creators of knowledge, and that thinking classrooms is all about. So if they come in and they sit in their desk and then you talk at them for 20 minutes, it's really hard to get them thinking afterwards. We gotta get them going early on. So if you want to do a bell ringer, if you want to have a little brain teaser, if you want to do a which one doesn't belong at the beginning, that's fine. That's not part of the beginning of the lesson. When you've wrapped that up and you clear your throat and you say, okay, now let's get on to factoring quadratic, adding 2-digit decimals, whatever. When you decide that that's the time, it's from that moment on that you have 5 minutes to get them into a thinking space. So you can still do that. And if you're teaching primary, you can still do carpet time and what the number of the day is. And you can do all those things. And then you clear your throat and say, we're going to begin with the main lesson now. But having said that, ask yourself, is there a way to integrate which one doesn't belong in number talks and any of these other instructional routines in a way into your classroom that has a stronger marriage with thinking classrooms? So rather than, for example, leading which one doesn't belong from the front of the class, what if you just put the students in groups of 3 and had them go off and do a which one doesn't belong on the vertical surfaces? We know that you'll get more students talking and more ideas shared if you distribute the opportunity that way, rather than leading it from the front of the room. The same is true of number talks and any of the instructional routines. So ask yourself, is this something that I can actually modify in such a way that there's a stronger alignment with what's going to happen for the rest of the lesson? Mm-hmm. And I'm a huge fan of all of these instructional routines. I really am. I really do like them. And also ask yourself, what is the purpose of it? What is it that I'm doing? And I think each of these offers students an opportunity to do some thinking. And I think that's the ultimate goal. And to get more students thinking, we need to distribute this a little bit more than having it as a fronted teacher-led activity.
That's great. That's very helpful. There are other kinds of instructional models that, take up more of the entire class time. I've heard teachers talking about, well, my principal insists that we do station rotation or that we do a workshop model. How are they compatible, or are they compatible, or does building thinking classrooms really replace and supplant what that might look like?
Yeah, so like I have something to say about the situation first, because I saw this on I think it was Facebook, where the teacher said that my principal expects me to use half my time doing stations. And this was in the 70s, there was this real push for manipulatives, as if we just have students do manipulatives, then learning is going to happen. And we know
everything else magically falls into place.
And we know now that's not true. And this is this idea of turning a description into a prescription. This idea that we've seen in classrooms where teachers do a lot of stations, that really good things happen. So therefore, and that's a description. That's a description. We've seen in classrooms where good things happen, we see stations. So therefore, I'm going to turn it into a prescription. You have to do stations. And there are lots of ways to do stations where absolutely no learning happens and no thinking happens. So is there a natural fit with these? Absolutely, right? If those stations are set up as thinking activities, and I've actually seen teachers do this in a vertical space. There's nothing that says that a station has to be at a desk, but it can be at a desk. But what is happening at that desk should be an opportunity for the students to think. And then there's a perfect marriage between the two, right? And one of the things about thinking classrooms that we've learned is that it's not just that students are on their feet, but that they're moving, right? So movement turns out to be a really powerful, and we don't fully understand why, but movement turns out to be something that's valuable for keeping students engaged. And maybe it's because it doesn't allow them to settle into too comfortable a space and then disengage. But there's a natural connection there, as long as the goal is to have students thinking. And I think that's everybody's goal, to be honest. And so thinking classrooms gives you a set of tools that can help with that. Mm-hmm. And like I said, why does a station have to be at a table? It can be at a board.
Right. Well, and I know in a lot of those models, one station or one group is a small group where a teacher's working with a specific group of students. And in the building thinking classroom, that happens all the time. The teacher's just moving between groups of students as opposed to the group of students rotating to the teacher at a prescribed moment. So that still feels compatible to me. It just looks a little bit different.
Yeah. And again, it's less prescriptive. The teacher is more assessing the situation and recognizing where it is they need to spend some time. Where do they need to enter and give a hint or impart a bit of knowledge, or maybe resolve a little bit of a interpersonal conflict that's happening, or move a marker or move a manipulative so that others are feeling like they have an opportunity to communicate and share and so on. And again, I don't want anyone to think that thinking classrooms is an instructional routine that's overly prescriptive. I've given 14 practices in there and micro moves that help you get students to think, but you're still going to have to sort of put them together and improvise it. And like I said in the first episode, there's never been a need for a teacher to be more active than in a thinking classroom. You have to be very present. And if you're sitting in one space and waiting for a group to get to you, that means that there's 8 stations that group is not getting any benefit from you.
Right, right. So changing gears a little bit, let's move into some discussion about assessment and grading. This seems to come up a lot. Readers, they're reading the book, they're all fired up until they get to the assessment chapter. And then they're like, whoa, I don't know how to do this anymore. This is too much. I can't do it. I'm not going to be able to do it. What encouragement do you have for those who want to try this and they need to take baby steps maybe and not worry so much about the assessment part right off the bat?
So, let's not talk about the book. Let's talk about a workshop. So if I'm doing a series of workshops with teachers, and I always get the assessment question, usually within the first 2 hours. What does assessment look like? And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that question comes out so early. And I'm sure that people who are reading the book, by the end of chapter 2, they're going, what does assessment look like? Right? I have this saying, I never talk about assessment on a first date. It's assessment and grading. It's just, not that it's not important. It's very important, but it's daunting for a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, assessment and grading should be reflective of your practice. And the first 11 chapters of this book is about changing your practice, right? And once that transformation has happened, then let's try to find an assessment paradigm that aligns with what it is you're living and breathing now. The second reason that it's daunting is that assessment, more than anything else, has a lot of stakeholders that care a lot about it, right? There's a lot of things that happen in a classroom that we do that aren't seen as high stakes, and that it's allowed to slide by the students and the parents and the colleagues and so on. But the minute we get into grading and assessment, this is high stakes stuff. All the stakeholders care about this. The students care about it, the parents care about it, the administration cares about it, the parents care about it. That digital portfolio that you have to populate cares about it. Everybody cares about it. And it's a lot of pressure when a lot of people and a lot of eyes are on you. And then it's also an alignment of your philosophy with what it is you're trying to do. And all that rubs up against the pragmatics or the impracticality of trying to do some things. So assessment is a high stakes, high pressure, complex environment. And I feel like, as a teacher, and I've been in the teaching game now for way longer than I care to admit, but we're getting up there into the 25-year range. And I feel like my assessment practice is constantly evolving. And how I think about assessment is constantly evolving. So having said all that, there's a reason it's the last 3 chapters. And the advice to you is this. Start changing your practice. Keep doing assessment the way you have always done it. and start changing your practice. And there's going to be a divergence that's going to start to happen, not at first, but as you start changing your practice, how you're teaching and how you're evaluating and assessing are going to start to diverge. And you're going to start to feel this tension. And when this tension becomes unbearable, then it's time to dig into, how do I change my assessment, grading, and evaluation practice? And that's what chapter 12, 13, and 14 are all about, is about resolving that tension through both a philosophical and a pragmatic approach. But reading those chapters before you've even enacted, it feels like that seems really complex, and why would I want to do something complex? And then, but if you've enacted the first 11 chapters and you get to that, and you're going to have a very different perspective. You're going to say, oh, that answers this question, and that answers this question, and that answers this question. Give yourself permission, right? The one thing that I will say that you can start to think about right now is that there's an unspoken rule in education that has existed for 150 years. And that unspoken rule is that part of every lesson has to look like rehearsal for a test or some sort of assessment. And no one has ever said this out loud. But if you take that idea that part of every lesson has to look like rehearsal for a test or an assessment, and you examine the way pedagogy has looked for the last 150 years, it's so clear that we are rehearsing for assessment. And that's why I get that question within the first 2 hours, because what is this a rehearsal for, right? Like, we're up at the boards, we're working in groups. What are we practicing for? What are we rehearsing for? If this is the rehearsal, what does the test look like? And that's that tension. And rest assured that that's, in thinking classrooms, we have learning days and we have assessment days. And then we also have learning time. And in that learning time, it is possible to harvest data that we can use for our grading if we wish. But don't rush. Don't rush. Let chapter 12, 13, and 14 be answers to questions that emerge from your changing practice. Don't.
I think that's really important permission to give people. And I know you say it in the book, and sometimes people miss that. But I think the idea, that's why the toolkit's in the final chapter. It's really about taking this a chunk at a time and testing it out and seeing how it works for you and how you need to modify and tweak. And like you said, it's not a prescription. And it should never be, because every one of your situations and students is going to be thinking differently than their people. And you touched on this. But let's get a little deeper just on the question of grading and working within a mandatory grading system where, I, as a teacher, have to log numbers or grades or some sort of check mark into my book every day or every week. And you're offering permission to just, for now, as you get started, keep doing that.
Yeah.
Without the pressure. Am I understanding that clearly? And then eventually you'll get to a point where your thinking classroom is so demonstrably powerful that then you could influence the grading system.
Yeah. And like teachers are hacks. And I say that in the most endearing, positive ways. And what I mean by
good
that,
at hacking.
they're good at hacking, right? They will find a way to take what they believe and make it work within whatever environment that's imposed upon them, right? Like that's what teaching is. If teachers are incredibly good at hacking, and I also talk in the book about what I call the two-headed monster, because I'm willing to bet that every teacher works in an environment that has a two-headed monster. And what I mean by that is one part of your division or school district or education department at the state or regional level is saying, we really want to go to standards-based grading. Like one head is pushing that way because almost every educational jurisdiction in the world right now is pushing in that direction. Outcomes-based or standards-based grading, right? Which is let's look at what a student has actually achieved, not look at how many points they managed to gather in this game of school.
Right.
Actually look at what learning they've achieved. So one head is pushing in that direction, and then another head is saying, oh, what a great idea. And to help you with that, I'm going to give you a digital version of a 1970s grade book that you're going to have to fill out, and teachers and parents have access to, and that they at any moment they can see exactly what a student's percentage is to 3 decimal places, and so on and so forth. And this is this two-headed monster. And what's interesting to me is that often these two heads don't even recognize that they're talking about different things, right?
They think that they're totally in sync, and they're actually really not.
Yeah, they're not. And when you get into that environment, because assessment is complicated and it's philosophically dialectic, and these are different philosophies, totally different. They're paradigmatically different, and we can't actually reconcile them. There is no middle ground. You're either this or you're that, and they think that it's the same. And so often the solution in that environment is to help the head that you want to win and to, I'd love to go in this direction. We really want to go in this direction, and let's build resources that help us go in that direction, and let's create a project, a locally developed project where we're exploring how to go in that direction. And because the minute you get on a locally developed project, you have permission to not have to do that thing, right? The other way, and this is getting back into the hacking, because I've worked with teachers who have to do this sort of thing, and they just hacked this digital program in the sense that, well, I'm not actually going to put numbers in, I'm going to put letters in, because the program doesn't know what to do with letters. Or I'm going to put colors in, I'm going to color the cells, and the colors is going to communicate where a student is in their learning on that outcome at the moment. Or I'm going to change, instead of having events across the top, I'm going to have outcomes across the top. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to color code how a student is doing. So the feedback is still flowing back out to the parents. It's just flowing in a different way. And it's not allowing, it's overriding the program's ability to create that 3 decimal places percentage that is not representative of anything at the moment, because we're still on the journey. And of course, I'm talking in a way that makes total sense to Erin, because she's read chapter 14, and anyone who has gotten to chapter 13 and 14 will know what I'm talking about. But the point is that I can guarantee you that you're working in an environment that is creating unnecessary tension, because not all the stakeholders are on the same page. And, right. Yeah. And
you can break down certain norms within your classroom, and the others you have to just work around, through, under.
And we talked about that with regards to COVID health restrictions in the first recording, in that I would never suggest to you that you should violate or supersede what the health requirements are. Likewise, I'm never going to tell you that you should disregard what your contractual obligation is to do. But what I will tell you is, do what you can inside your classroom and hack what you can of what's being enforced on you. But ultimately, you have to fulfill your contractual obligation, and teachers are really good at finding ways to do that while still enacting what they truly believe is important in learning.
And always keeping that goal as the focus, that it's about getting students to think.
Yeah. And it's not just about getting students to think, but it's avoiding doing things that rob them of an opportunity to think. And how do we stay consistent in that messaging?
Right. Well, I think that's a fabulous note to close on. Again, I want to thank you for taking the time. I hope that people find this really useful, and when your supplement comes out in just a few weeks, they'll find that useful as well. I know you're anxious to just keep giving your audience the support that they need to make this work really meaningful.
I'm trying. The audience has gotten very big. What I really love about the questions that we've been engaging with is that they're coming from real teachers in real situations. And the questions would not be emerging if they themselves were not trying to create a change, if they themselves were not railing against the institutional norms and trying to get students to think. So these are authentic questions that are emerged from teachers working in real environments, trying to make a difference for learners. And I think that's the most noble thing we can do as teachers.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much. And hopefully, as more questions emerge, we'll get to do this again.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. All right, until next time.